The conference table exploded into splinters as the golden red dragon brought his fist down with enough force to crack the reinforced surface. Flames licked at the expensive curtains while Ambassador Felrin pressed himself against the far wall, his own scales pale with terror. Prince Ashtar roared something in the old language, words that translated roughly to suggestions about where the crystalline ambassador could store his treaty revisions. Security personnel gathered outside the sealed doors, but none of them attempted entry. They had learned that lesson 3 incidents ago when 2 guards ended up in the medical bay with second-degree burns. The Dragon Prince's rages were a known hazard on the Galactic Concordance Station, something people avoided rather than confronted. Felrin made another attempt at the traditional calming protocols, speaking in low ceremonial tones while keeping his hands visible and unthreatening. Ashtar responded by melting another chair into slag. The ambassador gave up and quietly requested the cleaning crew through his communication device. 20 minutes later, the door chimed. Felrin hit the release and practically dove through the opening to escape. A human rolled a yellow cart into the war zone, seemingly unbothered by the smoke or the massive dragon currently punching holes in the decorative wall panels. Leo Grant surveyed the damage with a weary expression of someone who had seen worse. He had seen worse, actually, during his years in the Titan Moon mining operations before he decided janitorial work on a space station sounded peaceful. The irony was not lost on him. He set up his wet floor signs with practiced efficiency while Ashtar continued his destruction in the corner. The prince was focused on tearing down an entire section of shelving, roaring periodically to express his feelings about diplomatic protocol and species who did not understand proper respect. Leo filled his mop bucket and started on the scorch marks near the door. The chemical smell of the cleaning solution mixed with smoke and ozone. He worked his way methodically across the room, giving the raging dragon a wide berth, but not exactly hurrying either. Ashtar noticed the human eventually. He paused mid-destruction, a decorative trophy clutched in one clawed hand, and stared at the small creature calmly mopping up debris. Every other being on this station fled from his anger. This one was humming something while wiping down a burnt section of wall. The prince dropped the trophy and advanced on the human, drawing himself up to his full 9 feet of height. Flames flickered between his teeth as he loomed over the janitor with clear menace. Leo looked up, made eye contact, and went back to mopping. "You should run," Ashtar said in perfect but heavily accented standard. His voice was designed to intimidate, all bass tones and barely controlled fury. "Probably," Leo agreed without stopping his work. "But then I would have to come back later, and the chemicals work better on fresh burns. Plus it is 3rd shift, and I would like to finish before morning." The dragon blinked. This was not the usual response. Most species at least had the decency to show fear or respect or both. This human demonstrated neither. "Do you know who I am?" Ashtar demanded, producing more flame for emphasis. "Dragon Prince, Imperial heir, owner of a really bad temper." Leo moved his bucket closer to a particularly stubborn stain. "Also the reason I get hazard pay, so thanks for that, I guess." Ashtar felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. It might have been confusion. It might have been the beginning of doubt about whether his intimidation tactics were effective. He settled for releasing a burst of flame at the ceiling to reassert dominance. "Fire department charges extra for ceiling damage," Leo commented, following the scorch mark with his eyes. "Probably comes out of somebody's budget. Hope it is not mine." The prince stood there, flames dying in his throat, completely at a loss. He had reduced hardened warriors to trembling. He had made ambassadors weep. This human was worried about budget reports. "I destroyed this room because of an insult," Ashtar said, trying to explain the gravity of the situation. "The Crystalline Collective's representative failed to use my proper title in the treaty draft. This is a matter of honor." Leo considered this while scrubbing at melted plastic that had once been chair. "So you wrecked a room because someone forgot a word? It is not just a word. It is respect. It is acknowledgement of my position and my empire's power." "Sure," Leo said agreeably. He dragged a destroyed piece of furniture toward his cart. "Still seems like one expensive grammar lesson." This table probably cost more than I make in a year. Ashtar opened his mouth to roar again, to explain why this human could not possibly understand the complexities of interstellar politics and personal honor. Instead, he found himself actually thinking about the cost of the table, and the chairs, and the wall panels, and the carpet that was currently smoking despite Leo's best efforts with a fire suppression foam. It was a lot of destruction for a missing title. The thought was uncomfortable. Ashtar pushed it away and returned to breaking things, though with slightly less enthusiasm than before. He destroyed a cabinet full of ceremonial items, while Leo swept up the pieces of the previous cabinet. They worked in odd synchronization, one creating chaos and one cleaning it up. After another 10 minutes, Leo finished the accessible areas and started packing his cart. Ashtar watched him, uncharacteristically quiet. The human moved with efficient purpose, unbothered by the royal presence or the residual danger. "Same time tomorrow?" Leo asked as he prepared to leave. "Try to leave the ceiling alone, though. I really hate ladder work." He pushed his cart through the door before the prince could respond. Ashtar stood alone in the partially cleaned room, surrounded by evidence of his rage, and felt something he had not experienced in decades. He felt foolish. The sensation was so foreign that he did not even have a name for it first. He was Prince Ashtar of the Draconis Empire, educated in 17 forms of combat and 30 systems of law. He was feared across 6 sectors of space. He was not supposed to feel foolish because a janitor made casual observations about his behavior. Yet here he was, looking at the destruction and wondering for the first time if perhaps his reactions were slightly out of proportion to the offenses. The thought followed him all the way back to his quarters. 3 days passed before the next incident. Leo was restocking supplies in the maintenance closet on level 7 when his communicator chirped with the familiar emergency code. He sighed, grabbed his cart, and headed toward the banquet hall where Prince Ashtar had apparently taken issue with the seating arrangements. The scene was predictably chaotic. Overturned tables leaked expensive wines across imported flooring, while dignified ambassadors fled through side exits. Ashtar stood in the center of the destruction, breathing hard and sparking small flames from his nostrils. His golden red scales were darkened with rage, and his tail had taken out an entire buffet table. Security had cordoned off the area, but made no move to intervene. They just waited for the dragon to finish and for Leo to arrive. The human had become something of a station legend in less than a week. The Dragon Whisperer, some called him, though Leo thought that was giving him far too much credit. He ducked under the security tape and rolled his cart into the banquet hall. The smell of smoke mixed with spilled food created an unpleasant combination that made him wish he had brought a stronger air freshener. Ashtar was currently focused on destroying an elaborate ice sculpture, turning it to steam with concentrated bursts of flame. Leo set up his signs and got to work. He started with the wine stains because those set quickly and became a nightmare if left untreated. The dragon continued his rampage, now attacking the decorative banners that hung from the ceiling. Fabric fell in burning strips around Leo, who calmly stamped out the flames before they could spread. "You know," Leo said conversationally while mopping, "there is probably a less destructive way to express your feelings about party planning." Ashtar spun toward him, surprised again by the human's presence. They seated me next to the Fenler delegation. The Fenler, a species that still uses chemical propulsion for space travel. "It is an insult to my station. So you flipped the whole party instead of just switching chairs." Leo nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "That is definitely a choice you made." The prince felt that uncomfortable feeling again, the one the human somehow triggered just by existing. He tried to reignite his anger, but found it harder than usual. The rage was still there, but it felt different now, less righteous and more like a habit he was performing. "You do not understand the complexities of diplomatic seating," Ashtar said, but the words sounded weak even to him. "Probably not." Leo scrubbed at a particularly stubborn stain. "I'm just a janitor who cleans up after the complexities. But I do understand that you just caused a galactic incident because someone put you at table 7 instead of table 3. It is about respect." "Sure it is." Leo moved to collect broken dishes. "Can I ask you something? When was the last time you actually enjoyed one of these parties?" The question caught Ashtar off guard. He tried to remember and found he could not. Every diplomatic function was a test. Every social gathering a battlefield where he had to assert dominance and defend honor. Enjoyment had never been part of the equation. I'm not supposed to enjoy them, he said finally. I am supposed to represent my empire. Sounds exhausting. Leo dumped a load of broken glass into his collection bin. Back on Earth, I was a teacher for 15 years. Every day was representing the school and maintaining discipline and being a role model. Know what happened? Ashtar found himself curious despite his better judgment. What? I got divorced, had a breakdown, and ended up here mopping floors. Turns out constantly being someone important is a great way to forget how to be someone real. The prince sat down heavily on one of the few surviving chairs. His tail curled around his feet in a posture that indicated confusion rather than aggression. This human kept saying things that felt true in uncomfortable ways. I am royalty, Ashtar said, testing the words. This is who I am. If you say so. Leo started working on the ceiling burns with an extended brush. Seems to me like you're pretty miserable for someone living such an important life. They were quiet for a while after that. Leo worked, and Ashtar sat, both lost in their own thoughts. The dragon watched the human move with steady purpose, never hurried, but never wasting motion either. There was something peaceful about it that Ashtar had not experienced in his carefully structured existence. Why are you not afraid of me? The prince asked eventually. Leo paused in his work and actually considered the question. I died twice in mining accidents on Titan. Explosive decompression the first time, equipment failure the second. Medical technology brought me back both times, but I remember dying. After that, it is pretty hard to be scared of much. You are big and you breathe fire, but you are not the void of space, and you are not my own mortality. Ashtar had never heard anyone speak so casually about death. His species treated mortality with grave reverence, surrounding it with ceremony and meaning. This human discussed it like a minor inconvenience. That sounds terrifying, the prince admitted. It was. Leo went back to cleaning. Want to hear something funny, though? The second time I died, my last thought was about how I forgot to submit my time card for payroll. Not my family or my legacy or anything important. Just paperwork. The universe does not care about our drama. It is too busy being absurd. Despite everything, despite the destruction and the diplomatic incident and his own confusion, Ashtar felt his mouth twitch. The image of someone dying while worried about paperwork was so ridiculous that it bypassed his usual emotional defenses. You are strange, the prince said, but there was no heat in it. Says the dragon, throwing a tantrum about table assignments. Leo finished his immediate area and started packing his cart. I'm going to be honest with you, Your Highness. You can keep destroying rooms if you want. Job security for me. But you might want to ask yourself if being angry all the time is actually making you happy, or if it is just what you're used to. He left before Ashtar could formulate a response. The prince sat alone in the half-clean banquet hall, surrounded by the evidence of his rage, and realized he could not remember the last time anyone had asked if he was happy. The question haunted him for days. Leo was halfway through his shift when his communicator buzzed again. He checked the location and groaned. The observation deck this time. That meant big windows and delicate equipment, both of which would make the cleanup significantly more complicated. He grabbed extra supplies and headed up. The observation deck had been transformed into a disaster zone. Ashtar had apparently objected to something during an informal gathering because chairs were embedded in walls and several telescopic viewers were now expensive scrap metal. The dragon himself was still in the middle of it, breathing fire at a decorative fountain and looking miserable despite his rage. Leo noticed something different this time. The prince's destruction seemed half-hearted, almost obligatory. He was going through the motions of a tantrum rather than experiencing one. It was like watching someone perform a role they no longer believed in. Let me guess, Leo said as he set up his equipment. Someone looked at you wrong. Ashtar stopped mid-destruction and turned. His eyes held something that might have been relief at seeing the human. The Valerian trade minister suggested our shipping routes were inefficient. In front of others. So naturally you destroyed a room about it. Leo started collecting broken equipment. How did that fix the shipping routes? The prince opened his mouth, closed it, and sat down hard enough to crack the floor tiles beneath him. It did not. Huh. Leo made a note to repair the floor later. So you are mad, and the shipping routes are still inefficient, and now someone has to replace all this stuff? Seems like everybody lost on that one. Ashtar put his head in his hands, a gesture of defeat that looked strange on such a large creature. I did not know how to stop. Leo paused in his cleaning. This was new. The dragon had never admitted weakness before, never shown anything except rage or brief confusion. This felt important. Stop what exactly? Leo asked, gentler than usual. This. Ashtar gestured at the destruction, the anger, the violence. It is who I am, who I was raised to be. Draconis royalty does not show weakness. We do not smile or laugh or show affection. Those emotions make us vulnerable. Anger is safe. Anger is strength. That is the saddest thing I have heard in a while, Leo said honestly. He sat down on his upturned bucket, giving up on cleaning for the moment. You are telling me you have never been allowed to just be happy. Happy is not a concept that applies to Empire heirs. The prince's voice was hollow. From the moment I hatched, I was taught protocol and warfare and dominance. Emotions were trained out of me, except for rage, because rage could be useful. Everything else was weakness that enemies could exploit. Leo was quiet for a moment, processing this. Can I tell you about the worst day of my teaching career? Ashtar looked up, confused by the change in subject, but nodded. Spring concert, 6th grade. We had been practicing for months. These kids worked so hard. Leo smiled at the memory. Day of the show, everything goes wrong. The sound system fails. A kid throws up on stage from nerves. Another kid forgets his lines completely and just starts crying. The backdrop falls down. It is a complete disaster. What did you do? Ashtar asked despite himself. I laughed. Leo's smile widened. I stood there in front of all those parents and staff, and I just lost it. Started laughing so hard I had to sit down. And you know what happened? The kids started laughing. Then the parents. Soon the whole auditorium is laughing at this absolute catastrophe of a concert. That sounds like failure. It was the best concert we ever had. Leo's eyes were distant with memory, because it stopped being about perfection and started being about the experience. Those kids learned more from that disaster than they did from any successful performance. They learned that sometimes things go wrong, and that is okay. They learned that laughter is stronger than embarrassment. Ashtar listened, something stirring in his chest that he did not have a name for. My father would have considered that shameful. Loss of control. Your father sounds like he missed out on a lot of joy. Leo stood and grabbed his mop. You want to try something radical? Want to hear the stupidest joke I know? The prince blinked at the sudden offer. I did not understand jokes. My species does not have humor. Everybody has humor if they let themselves. Leo leaned on his mop. Okay, here goes. Why did the spaceship break up with the asteroid? Ashtar started blankly. Because it needed space. Leo delivered the punchline with complete seriousness. There was a long silence. Then the prince made a sound somewhere between a cough and a wheeze. Then another. Then suddenly he was laughing, really truly laughing, for the first time since he was a hatchling barely able to fly. The sound was rusty and unpracticed, but genuine. Leo grinned. There you go. That is what happiness sounds like. Ashtar cannot stop. The joke was not even that funny, but something inside him had cracked open after 200 years of being sealed shut. He laughed until his sides hurt, until tears leaked from his eyes, until he had to sit down because his legs felt weak. When he finally wound down, he felt different. Lighter somehow, like he'd been carrying weight he did not know existed, and someone had helped him set it down. That was a terrible joke, he said, still smiling. The worst, Leo agreed cheerfully. Want to hear another one? They spent the next hour like that. Leo told jokes ranging from clever to absolutely groan-worthy while cleaning up the observation deck. Ashtar listened and laughed and slowly remembered what joy felt like. Sometimes the prince would try to contribute his own humor, awkward and unpracticed, and Leo would laugh encouragingly even when the jokes made no sense. Ambassador Felrin found them eventually, drawn by reports of the prince making strange sounds. He arrived expecting the worst, and instead discovered his charge sitting peacefully while a human janitor told stories about his ex-wife's terrible cooking. The ambassador stood in the doorway, completely at a loss. Prince Ashtar was smiling, actually genuinely smiling. The expression looked foreign on his face, but undeniably real. "Your Highness," Felrin said hesitantly. "Are you well?" Ashtar looked at his handler and then at Leo, who had gone back to mopping with a knowing expression. "Yes," the prince said slowly, testing the truth of it. "I think I might be." The changes started small. Ashtar still attended diplomatic functions, but his temper seemed less volatile, his reactions more measured. When the Kelthian ambassador mispronounced his title, the prince simply corrected him instead of destroying furniture. Station personnel noticed, but were afraid to comment, worried that acknowledging the change might somehow reverse it. Leo noticed too. The dragon sought him out now, not just during cleanup operations, but during normal shifts. The prince would appear in whatever corridor Leo was working and walk alongside him, asking questions about human culture or sharing observations about galactic politics. They developed an odd friendship that baffled everyone who witnessed a .1 evening cycle. Leo found Ashtar waiting outside the maintenance office with what appeared to be determination mixed with nervousness. The dragon's tail twitched in a way that indicated some internal struggle. "I need to show you something," Ashtar said without preamble. "Will you come to my quarters?" Leo considered the potential awkwardness of this, but agreed. They walked through the station together, an unlikely pair that drew stares from passing species. The prince's quarters were surprisingly sparse for royalty, just functional furniture and diplomatic documents. No personal items or decorations beyond what protocol demanded. That Ashtar moved to a secured panel and entered a long code. A hidden compartment opened, revealing a small data pad wrapped in protective cloth. He handled it with extreme care, like it might break under his claws. "This is from when I was young," he said quietly, "before the training became intense, before I learned that emotion was weakness." He activated the pad and handed it to Leo. The human looked at the screen and saw images of a much smaller dragon, barely 3 feet tall, playing with what appeared to be toys and other hatchlings. In every image, young Ashtar was clearly happy, his face open and expressive in ways the adult version never was. "You were a cute kid," Leo said, scrolling through the images. "I was weak." Ashtar's voice was hollow. "That is what they told me. Every time I laughed or cried or showed affection for my clutchmates, I was corrected. By the time I was 50 years old, the training had removed everything except anger. Anger was permitted because it served the Empire." Leo looked at the dragon with new understanding. "How old are you now?" 217. "So you have been angry for over a century." Leo handed the pad back carefully. "That is a long time to only feel one thing." Ashtar carefully wrapped the pad again and returned it to its hiding place. "I'm not supposed to have kept these images. Attachments to the past are considered sentimental weakness, but I could not destroy them. They are the only proof that I was once something other than what I became." They sat in silence for a while, Leo processing what he had learned and Ashtar clearly struggling with the vulnerability of sharing this information. Finally, the human spoke. "Can I tell you something about my divorce?" The prince looked up, curious about another piece of the janitor's mysterious past. "My wife left me because I stopped being a person and started being a role." Leo's voice was matter-of-fact, but sad. "Teacher, role model, community figure. I was so busy being what everyone needed that I forgot how to just be myself. Came home one day and she had packed her bags. Said she married a person but lived with a job description. Did you try to fix it? By the time I realized what I had lost, it was too late. She had already met someone who knew how to laugh, how to be present, how to just exist without performing all the time." Leo smiled sadly. "I do not blame her. I had turned myself into something hollow. All responsibilities and no joy." Ashtar felt a painful recognition. "You understand then what it is to lose yourself to duty." "Yeah." Leo stood and stretched. "But here's the thing I learned after. You can get yourself back. It is hard, and it takes time, and you have to fight against everything that trained you to be hollow. But it is possible. I left Earth, took a job mopping floors on a space station, and slowly remembered how to be Leo instead of Mr. Grant the teacher. I cannot just stop being a prince. No, Leo agreed. But you can figure out how to be a prince who is also a person. Those things do not have to be separate. The dragon considered this. It was a radical thought by Draconis standards, perhaps even heresy. But it also felt true in a way that most of his training never had. "Will you help me?" Ashtar asked, and the vulnerability in his voice would have shocked anyone who knew him as the raging tyrant of the Concordance Station. "I am a janitor who tells bad jokes and cleans up your messes," Leo pointed out. "Not sure I am qualified to teach princes anything. You are the only person in 300 years who has treated me like I am more than my title and my temper." The prince's golden eyes held something like hope. "You made me laugh. You reminded me that I used to be capable of joy. That is worth more than any diplomatic training." Leo thought about his responsibilities, his simple life, the peaceful routine he had built. Then he thought about the small dragon in those images, happy and free before the Empire got hold of him. He thought about his own lost years of being a role instead of a person. "Okay," he said finally, "but I am warning you now, my teaching methods are weird and you're probably going to hate some of it. I destroyed rooms for 2 centuries because I was angry. I think I can handle weird teaching methods." They shook on it, human hand engulfed by dragon claw, and started a partnership that would eventually change more than just one prince's life. Neither of them knew it yet, but they had just planted the seeds of a revolution that would reshape how an entire empire viewed strength and emotion. For now, though, they just sat in the sparse quarters, and Leo told stories about Earth while Ashtar listened and occasionally laughed. Small steps toward healing, one terrible joke at a time. The warning came through official channels 3 weeks later. Emperor Kar, that's supreme ruler of the Draconis Empire, was arriving at the Concordance Station for an unannounced inspection of his son's diplomatic progress. Ambassador Felrin went pale when he received the message and immediately began stress-molting scales. "This is bad," the ambassador told Leo in a panicked whisper. They were in a supply closet because Felrin was too terrified to risk being overheard. The Emperor never visits unless something is seriously wrong. He knows about the changes in Ashtar. Changes like not destroying 3 rooms a week. Leo asked, "That seems like good news. You do not understand Draconis culture." Felrin was literally shaking. "The Emperor will see Ashtar's newfound restraint as weakness. He will see the laughter and friendship as corruption, and he will blame you." Leo absorbed this information with his usual calm. "So what does that mean exactly?" "It means the Emperor might kill you, or banish Ashtar, or both." The ambassador wrung his hands. "You need to stay away from the prince until this visit is over. Maybe transfer to a different station entirely. The Emperor is not like his son. He is ancient and powerful and completely unforgiving of anything he perceives as softness." But Leo did not get a chance to decide whether to hide or stay. The Emperor arrived within hours, his massive ship docking at the primary bay with enough gravitational distortion to shake the entire station. Karditz himself was enormous, easily twice his son's size, with scales so dark they were almost black and eyes that glowed with inner fire. Ashtar met his father in the main concourse with all proper ceremony. He knelt in the traditional pose of submission while the Emperor circled him, examining every detail with cold precision. Station personnel watched from a safe distance, sensing the danger in the air. "You have changed," Karditz said in a voice like grinding stone. "Reports suggest you have not had a proper rage in weeks. Explain this weakness." "I have learned better control, father." Ashtar kept his head bowed. "My effectiveness as a diplomat has improved. Control is not the same as strength." The Emperor's tail lashed dangerously. "I have also heard reports of you consorting with a human. A janitor. This is beneath you. He is my friend." The word hung in the air like a confession of treason. Karditz went very still, which was somehow more frightening than if he had raged. "Friends are liabilities," the Emperor said softly. "Attachments are exploitable. I thought we trained this understanding into you. You trained me to be angry, Ashtar said, and Leo heard the tremor in his voice from where he was watching through a doorway. You trained me to use rage as my only tool. But anger without control is not strength, father. It's just noise. Car that struck his son hard enough to send him sliding across the polished floor. Species scattered in terror. The Emperor advanced on Ashtar with murder in his eyes. You dare lecture me about strength? You who have been corrupted by a species that barely understands fire? You who have forgotten what it means to be Draconis. I have not forgotten, Ashtar said, climbing to his feet despite the blood leaking from his mouth. I have just remembered there is more to being Draconis than rage. There was a time when our people built beautiful things, created art, celebrated joy, before we became an empire of anger. Sentiment. Car that spat the word. The kind of weakness that loses wars and crumbles empires. I see this corruption runs deep. Perhaps you are unfit to be heir. The Emperor turned to address the gathered crowd, his voice carrying through the concourse with terrible authority. I hereby strip my son of his title and position. He is no longer Prince Ashtar. He is just another failure who lets softness destroy his potential. Leo stepped out of the doorway. Every rational part of his brain screamed that this was suicide, but he could not watch his friend be destroyed for learning to be happy. Ashtar saw him emerge, and his eyes went wide with fear, not for himself, but for the human. With respect, Your Majesty, Leo said, his voice steady despite his hard hammering. I think you are making a mistake. The Emperor turned toward him with the kind of attention a predator gives prey. A human janitor thinks to advise me? This is the corrupting influence you have fallen under, my son. This is the person who taught me that strength is not just about destruction, Ashtar said, positioning himself between his father and Leo. That sometimes the hardest thing is to choose mercy over rage. Mercy is for the weak. Car that's advanced on them both. I should incinerate this human, and then you can watch as I burn away every soft thought he put in your head. Then you'll have to burn through me first. Ashtar spread his wings, making himself a shield. I will not let you hurt him. The Emperor stopped. For the first time in 3,000 years, one of his children had directly defied him. The shock of it was almost physical. You would defend a janitor over your own father? Over your empire? I would defend my friend, Ashtar said firmly. And yes, even over you. The tension in the air was suffocating. Every being on the station held their breath, waiting for the Emperor to destroy them both. Car that's raised one massive claw, fire gathering in his throat. And then Ashtar did something that saved both their lives. He laughed at IT was not a nervous laugh or mocking one. It was genuine amusement at the absurdity of standing up to his father over friendship with a janitor. The sound was so unexpected, so entirely foreign to the serious moment, that even the Emperor paused in confusion. What could possibly be amusing about your death? Kartas demanded. Everything, Ashtar said, still smiling through his fear. This whole situation is ridiculous. We are about to kill each other over whether it is acceptable for me to have learned how to laugh. If that is not absurd, then I do not know what is. The laughter was contagious. Despite everything, despite the danger, a few beings in the crowd found themselves smiling. The sheer unexpectedness of joy in the face of death cracked something in the atmosphere. Emperor Car that stood frozen, the fire dying in his throat as he stared at his son. He had not heard Ashtar laugh since the prince was barely old enough to fly. The sound triggered something in the ancient dragon's memory, something he had buried under millennia of empire building and war. You laugh in the face of your execution, the Emperor said slowly. This is either madness or courage. I am not certain which. Maybe both, Leo said, finding his voice despite his terror. Your Majesty, can I ask you something? When was the last time you laughed? The question was so unexpected that Car that's actually answered. I do not remember. 3,000 years perhaps. Maybe longer. That is a long time to only be angry, Leo said, echoing the words he had once told Ashtar. Humans laugh because the universe is terrifying and absurd, and if we did not laugh, we would never stop screaming. It is not weakness. It is survival. The Emperor considered the small human with new interest. You died twice and came back. Ashtar told me this in his reports. You understand mortality in ways most beings do not. Yeah, Leo said. And that understanding taught me that rage is exhausting. Life is too short, even for species that live thousands of years, to spend all of it angry. Your son is not weaker for learning joy. He is stronger because now he has more tools than just destruction. Kar, that's looked at Ashtar, really looked at him for the first time in centuries. He saw the prince standing tall despite his injuries, protecting a friend at risk to himself. There was strength there, just not the kind the Emperor had tried to breed into his children. Tell me, the Emperor said to his son, are you happier now? After this human corrupted you with laughter? Ashtar did not hesitate. Yes. For the first time in 200 years, I remember what happiness feels like. I'm still strong, father. I can still fight and negotiate and lead. But now I can also choose when rage is appropriate instead of it being my only response to everything. The Emperor was quiet for a long moment. The entire station held its breath. Then Kar did something that shocked everyone present. He sat down heavily, his massive form settling onto the floor with exhaustion that went beyond the physical. I built an empire on rage, he said quietly. I taught my children that emotion was weakness and anger was strength. I have ruled for 3,000 years, and I cannot remember the last time I felt anything except duty and fury. He looked at Leo. Is that what you meant about losing yourself to a role? Yes, Your Majesty. Leo sat down too, refusing to let fear keep him standing. You became so good at being emperor that you forgot how to be Kar. I do not know if there is anything left of Kar that's to remember. There must be, Ashtar said, moving closer to his father. You chose not to kill us. That choice came from somewhere that is not just empire and duty. The emperor looked at his son, and something ancient shifted in his eyes. You were such a joyful hatchling, always laughing and playing and asking questions about everything. I watched them train it out of you, and I told myself it was necessary, that you could not rule an empire with laughter. Maybe empires need more laughter, Leo suggested. Maybe if your people remembered joy, they would not need to express everything through conquest and rage. It was a dangerous thing to say to the most powerful being in 6 sectors. But Kar did not incinerate him. Instead, the emperor seemed to truly consider the possibility. Change would take generations, he said finally. My people have been warriors for 10,000 years. You cannot undo that with jokes and friendship. No, Ashtar agreed. But you can start. You can give permission for emotion beyond anger. You can let your people remember that before we were warriors, we were beings who felt everything. The emperor stood, and the entire station tensed again. But instead of violence, Kar placed one massive claw on his son's shoulder with something approaching gentleness. I will not strip your title, he said, but I have a condition. You will return to the homeworld in 6 months and establish a new position. Ambassador for Cultural Understanding. Your mission will be to teach our people what you have learned here. Ashtar blinked in surprise. You want me to teach Draconis citizens about laughter and friendship? I want you to try. The emperor's voice was heavy with centuries of regret. I cannot undo the damage I have done, but perhaps you can prevent the next generation from becoming as hollow as I am. He turned to Leo. You will come as well, human, as advisor and teacher. The pay will be significant. Leo thought about his simple life as a janitor, his peaceful routine. Then he thought about young Ashtar in those images, about an entire species that had forgotten joy, about the possibility of real change. I want hazard pay, he said, and vacation time. Despite everything, despite 3,000 years of being unable to feel anything but anger and duty, Emperor Kar laughed. It was a rusty sound, unpracticed and strange, but undeniably genuine. The sound rippled through the gathered crowd like a shockwave. The ancient emperor who had not laughed in 3 millennia was smiling. 6 months later, Ashtar returned to the Concordant station for one final visit. He wore new ceremonial robes, marking his position as cultural ambassador, and he moved with confidence that was no longer based solely on intimidation. Leo walked beside him, now officially appointed as human cultural advisor to the Draconis Empire. Are you ready for this? Leo asked as they toured the station one last time. No, Ashtar admitted. Teaching an entire empire to rediscover joy sounds impossible. But then again, I thought learning to laugh was impossible, and you proved me wrong. They stopped at the observation deck, where they had first really talked. A young Draconis noble was there, clearly struggling with rage issues, destroying equipment with the same blind fury Ashtar once showed. The prince smiled at Leo. I believe this one needs your help. Leo sighed, but he was smiling too. Get my cart then, and maybe practice that terrible space joke. We are going to need it. They approached the raging noble together, a prince who had learned to laugh and a janitor who taught him how. Behind them, the galaxy continued its chaotic spin, but in one small corner of space, revolution had begun with nothing more than bad jokes and the courage to choose joy over rage. Sometimes the most profound changes start with the smallest gestures. Sometimes empires are transformed by janitors. And sometimes the most powerful thing in the universe is simply remembering how to laugh.